welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some topical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics pertaining to natal and relationship astrology. And I also do tarot readings. You can email me at the email address in the video description. Thank you. And also, I mentioned this, that I have started a tarot channel more recently, and I am going to be posting there hopefully at least once a week. So far, I have maintained that. And of course, if you're interested in tarot, I would greatly appreciate it if you would go check it out. I'm going to link it in the video description, also in the pinned comment, and maybe subscribe to it. I would be very appreciative if you are interested in tarot. Okay, thank you. And also now, in the video introduction, I'm also going to mention once again, please subscribe. And I have mentioned this also in other videos, that I checked my video analytics and my videos analytics, and only roughly 1/3 to now 40% of people who regularly watch my videos are subscribed to my channel. So please subscribe. It only takes a second and it's free, and it's the easiest way to support me. Thank you. And okay, today's topic is a topic that I have postponed talking about for a very long time, and I kept thinking exactly how I should articulate everything that I want to say about this. To be fair, I don't have any kind of a script prepared, so I'm probably going to ramble. I'm just issuing this disclaimer already because there are so many things that I want to say about this topic. I actually have considered making a video about feminism and talking about my perspective on feminism, because I feel like it's basically impossible to touch upon the topic of gender without also somehow, moving into the territory of feminism and gender roles and all this stuff. I mean, so at some point in the future, I think I am going to also make videos about feminism and some of the gaslights that are being used against it I see in society, and some other things, whatever. I mean, I do basically identify as a feminist, even though technically I'm not some kind of a weird radical. But to me, feminism means, the freedom to be yourself, pretty much. That's what it means to me. So I think it's being attacked from all kinds of weird angles, and women, I think, collectively are being gaslit in various ways in today's world. But yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on this topic with respect to this video, because I really want to focus on astrology and basically what astrology has provided me with, what insights it has given me that I don't think I would have really gotten from elsewhere, from conventional methods of information and knowledge from science about gender. So very briefly, I think most people divide, when they think about gender, right, they only think about two main things. It's all about nature versus nurture, right? I mean, in general, when it comes to, for instance, raising children, it's all about nature versus nurture. Basically, people just think that, there are two main components to a person. There is the biological aspect, which is your DNA and everything that comes with it. And then there is the nurture part, which is technically how your culture affects you, how it defines you as a person. And really, in the old days, I would say, and when I say in the old days, I'm pretty much talking about almost every generation that was born before, let's say, roughly 50. And until the beginning of recorded history, most people have approached raising children with the mentality that every child is a blank slate that you can just write upon, right? So basically, they even annihilated the nature part. They just treated children as, like a blank slate, literally, or an empty vessel that can just be filled up by the teachings of the parents and the society and the culture, which is actually, well, I think now it's becoming increasingly more obvious that this is not true, because genetics has advanced a lot more, right? I myself, yours truly over here, I got a DNA testing, one of those MyHeritage kits. Like at the beginning of the year, I had some surprises that, I mean, that's why they're called surprises, because I was surprised. I didn't expect to be surprised because I actually thought I knew my family history pretty well, but I won't get into my personal results. Just to mention this because I am also pretty curious, about my origins, and also I think genetics is fascinating, even though my knowledge in it is very limited. And while I'm at the topic of genetics, actually, I want to say that honestly, and I know this is gonna sound pretty crazy. I mean, even for an astrology channel, but I really think that there is a correlation between a person's horoscope and their genetic inheritance. I don't have, of course, any proof, like undisputable proof that this is the way it is, but I do have evidence. I mean, how else would you explain the fact that by looking at a person's horoscope, you can determine, interesting facts about their physical appearance? And I'm talking about their physical appearance before they get any plastic surgery. How do you explain that? And also when it comes to, medical astrology, right? You can determine a person's vulnerabilities based on their horoscope. So how would you be able to do that if there wasn't some kind of a correlation between the stars and the genes that you inherit from your family lineage? Because basically, what exactly is DNA, right? DNA is like the sum of all the information that has been passed down from your ancestors from one generation to another. And you're not going to inherit all of that. You're just going to selectively inherit certain characteristics. And aside from that, there's also this person that I used to talk to who was pretty much into Kabbalah and like Jewish mysticism and all this stuff. And he actually said that according to Judaism, which is actually the only Abrahamic religion that acknowledges or accepts the idea of reincarnation, it's a similar thing. They teach that basically a soul is reincarnated in the same bloodline, provided that there are still members in that bloodline, basically. There are even like lines, supposedly. I mean, I don't know, I'm not an expert. But there are even like some lines and teachings in their religion about something like that said the sins of the father will be punished by the son, will be punished through the son, or will be cleared through the son, something like that. The idea being that, basically bad karma travels in a bloodline from one generation to another. And yeah, it's the kind of thing that I guess a lot of people don't really want to talk about or don't want to think about. They don't like the idea. But, I'm not going to get into too many personal details, but let's just say I have very strong reasons to believe that that is actually very accurate. Because I have had some things in my family that, bad karmas that could potentially explain some things that have happened in my family for like a few generations now. Again, won't get too much into it. But yeah, I do think that there is a correlation between, let's say, genetics and astrology. Aside from that, though, the main thing that astrology introduces, and I think eventually maybe it will be also proven by genetics, is that humans have a component, maybe, I don't know, but astrology is more than genetics because it shows the spiritual evolution, right? So it shows like the sum of information that has been passed down through previous incarnations, not just your bloodline, and that's just, so I think it's like, even though there is a correlation, I think there is a correlation between genetics and astrology. I don't think it's like a complete overlap, I think astrology is about your spiritual inheritance. And also, this is something I didn't finish saying, that the perspective in Jewish mysticism is that basically this reincarnating in the same bloodline only happens as long as there are children being born in that bloodline. Because I asked this person, because, I was like, oh, does this mean that, if I don't have children, I'm not going to be reincarnating? Because it was kind of hopeful. And he was like, no, actually, what happens is that you get born into a different bloodline. Yeah, so basically, you're not going to escape until you clear your karma, and until you reach that point where you no longer have any debts towards anyone in this world, and you have learned all your lessons, and basically reach a point that even Buddhists have said, of letting go of all material desires and attachments. Then you're going to be ready to leave this world. But until you have unfulfilled desires, you're going to keep reincarnating until you get what you want, basically. So, or until you pay back all your karmic debts. So basically, yes, this is the main thing that astrology really has proven to me. Really, it has absolutely proven it to me. I mean, again, I don't claim to understand exactly how this happens, by which mechanism. I don't know. I am just a humble, simple person who I just know what I see, okay? I believe what I see. And what I have seen over the years is that there's undeniably a link between a person's horoscope and their experiences in life, and the energies that they have, and the personality they have. So in my mind, the way that I see it is astrology gives a third component to gender, which is not being talked about, and that is the spiritual component, which is the energies that you are inheriting from wherever. I would say mainly from past lives, right? But it's a spiritual component that has nothing to do with the physical gender, and has nothing to do with the cultural imprints either, which is really important to understand. And also something that I wanted to say about this, I was going to say something about this, but I think I forgot. About astrology. Oh yeah, I was going to say this, that I have come across these theories repeatedly by psychologists, who say things, psychologists, therapists, people into psychology, or anthropologists, who basically make it sound like everything, right? Everything that a person displays in terms of personality, especially when it comes to things like neuroses and whatever, usually because that's what therapy deals with, right? It's the parts of you that are maladaptive and antisocial and creating problems for other people. That's usually when the therapist steps in to analyze your behavior. It basically, they make it sound, or the scientific perspective is that all of these things are completely explained through your childhood experiences, right? Through your early upbringing, through your early environment, basically your experiences. And I would agree with that, actually. I don't think that there is a contradiction between astrology and between a person's horoscope and their experiences. And that's just it, though. That is just it. The part that nobody can explain to me is how you can look at a person's horoscope and actually know what their experiences were like. This is what I talk about in many of my videos, like the video that I made on bad childhood experiences, for instance, right? It's like, and I've seen this time and again, where, you have certain placements in a horoscope that will show the kind of experiences that this child has had. So, like I mentioned in that video, for instance, if you have like Mars aspecting the moon or the fourth house, it can show somehow that the flight or fight response was overly stimulated in childhood, to put it mildly, right? I'm not going to use the word abuse because that's not 100% always the case, but somehow the child felt threatened through the childhood environment, through the through the parents or the primary caregivers or the home environment, right? Maybe it wasn't even the primary caregivers. It could be the nanny. It could be any person that just was a presence in their childhood. And that's something that science cannot explain, right? How is it that, okay, I can understand that these experiences will create certain types of personalities and neuroses and whatever you want to call them, pathologies, when it comes to the person's psychological development. But what they can't explain is how come the horoscope can also, with great accuracy, I would say, I mean, I haven't actually done like statistics with which percentage is it accurate, but I mean, considering all the charts that I've read, I would say it's shockingly accurate, where you can look at a person's horoscope and be like, okay, I can see this person has had a problem with the father figure or a problem with the mother figure, you know, and get increasingly more specific the more you analyze the chart in depth or the horoscope in depth of the person. So to me, that is evidence that there is something out there, like a higher plan, a higher spiritual plan that determines, okay, this child's going to be born in this environment and is going to have these experiences. The question is, no, I would say it's not a question, actually. It's a question for like people who don't know astrology. Is like, is there something there before you are born? Like, are you actually inheriting something spiritually when you are born into this world? Or is it just nature versus nurture? And to me, again, as far as I have seen, astrology definitely shows that there is a third component, which is a spiritual part. That being said, though, what do I mean by the spiritual part? Because I have heard other astrologers talk about this, and even when I, to be honest, use things like male, female, masculine, feminine, to me, I mean, I know what generally society understands through those definitions, but when you look at it from an energetic point of view, like when it comes to the spiritual component, there is no masculine and feminine, really, because and that's the twist of it. See, that's the problem. Let me put it like this. Let me start a different way. And here's where I'm going to border on feminism as well, because see, I personally, and I, as a person who identifies as a feminist, I have never denied that there are biological differences between men and women. I mean, to me, it's that denying that is denying reality. Of course, there are biological differences. What I do argue, and I think that feminism argues, is that these biological differences should never be a reason for women to be deprived of opportunities and rights upon birth. Of course, later on, if they commit crimes against the system, there should be various levels of punishments. But at birth, your gender should not determine what opportunities you have in life and whether you should have the right to control your own life or not. To me, those are like basic human rights. End of discussion. And mainly, if you were to, for me to break it down like on a purely cold-blooded logical level, it's because nobody has come up with any perfect mathematical equation by which they can 100% pinpoint how gender, to which extent your biological gender affects you as a person. Nor will they come up with this shit, because as far as I've seen, based on astrology as well, the insights that I have gathered through astrology have proven to me that it's impossible, because there are so many variations from one individual to another. And it's also because, as far as I have seen, and my belief is that there is a spiritual component to gender, that oftentimes, and I would say in the more evolved you are as a person, the more your personality overrides the biological imprint. You know, this is how I see it. Like, I see people as like having an animal side and having a spiritual side. And also, on top of this, or like, yeah, on top of these two sides, there's culture, right? There's the nurture factor. There's society telling you how you should behave based on their expectations, which is probably the useless part that I think we need to get rid of. But aside from the useless part, when it comes to the biological differences, they should be taken into account under certain circumstances. So I am going to talk about feminism, at least with this respect. This is the biggest, I think, gaslight that is happening against women collectively right now with respect to feminism. It's basically this idea that, like, if you're a feminist, you don't have the right to ask for your needs, your biological needs to be met. And that's, I think, what is creating this great confusion and hatred even among women, right? Because what happened before feminism is that, to a large extent, you know, society acknowledged the fact that women had different biological needs in relationships. And I stress this is relevant in relationships almost entirely. And more specifically, romantic relationships, right? Not any relationships. And namely, I'm talking about the fact that women need security, stability in relationships, and to a large extent, this was respected by society before feminism. What happened after feminism was that basically men started holding women's biological needs over their heads and being like, hey, if you want to get this, if you want to get your basic needs in a relationship met, you need to basically completely give up your human rights, your freedom, your independence, your desire to get an education, to have a life of your own. Basically, you have to completely commit identity suicide and destroy your spiritual side so that you can make a man feel, I don't know, superior to you. And that's how you're going to get your basic needs met, which is complete and utter bullshit. Like, that is the main problem in the world today with respect to gender. It's that, and I am 2000% a feminist. And again, this is a topic that I could probably talk about for like hours and hours. In any case, I can promise you this: I could completely demolish any argument against feminism with very simple logical arguments. There are no logical arguments against feminism. Let's make this very clear. There are arguments, but not logical ones. Like, there are arguments that basically all of them hover around, men's feelings. And the fact that, yes, men have been used to having women slaves for thousands of years. So it's going to be a hard habit to break, but this idea that we should keep something just because that's the way things were for thousands of years is absolutely idiotic, right? We could just as easily say that, well, for thousands of years, people didn't have electricity, so we should all go to bed at 7 p.m., which we probably will reach that point once, the NWO takes over, but cough, cough. Maybe I probably shouldn't go too far off topic. So back to the issue of gender, though. That's what I wanted to say. That basically there's this like bullshit happening, gaslighting happening against women, where women are being told that, they have to sacrifice one side of themselves for the other, right? And that was the deal actually for most of human history, right? Women didn't have the right to be themselves. They got their biological needs met by and large, right? Because men understood that women needed security, so women were promised marriage. So at least on the surface, it was like you had someone to rely on. Of course, the fact that he would beat you up and cheat with the neighbor was something that you as a woman were obligated to overlook. But let's not get into details, right? But on top of that, aside from that, right, women didn't have any other rights. They didn't have the right to have an education. For most of history, they had very little to no education and very little to no rights. Up until, I think, the 1930s, even in the most open-minded societies in the West, women didn't have the right to own property. So even if you were like born into a wealthy family as a woman, you couldn't have the right to be independent because you had to marry someone to actually get access to your own inheritance. And even in those cases, they would usually brand you as a lunatic and throw you in a lunatic asylum so that they could just take your money and, leave you there to rot. If you don't think that this happened, Google these like cases in the 30s, the 20s and the 30s in the UK especially. I remember reading that this was actually a common thing. Either the husbands or the relatives of the women, would label them crazy and let them rot in lunatic asylums, because the women since they didn't have a voice according to the law, didn't even have the right to defend themselves, right? But again, this is a topic I could talk about for ages. and it would never be over. But when it comes to the biology, right? What is the biological side of a person? Let me put it like this. This is the simple side of a person, right? It's the animal side of us that should not be ignored. Let me put it like that. I think ideally what we should be aiming for in today's world is to find like a middle ground between people meeting their biological needs and also their physical needs, their spiritual needs, sorry. I think what is happening, and the reason why you have an epidemic of mental illness and all these things happening, is because we have had such major progress, such huge leaps in technology in the past 100 years or so, that the animal side of us is struggling to keep up. It's just totally overwhelmed, right? The fact that I'm recording this at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, is proof of that. See, like, the animal side of me is extremely annoyed right now because I should be asleep. But, you know, it's not up to the animal side of me to decide that. See, what I'm trying to say here is that basically this is the simple part of us, which is to a large extent, common. I'm not saying it's identical among all people. Of course, there are variations, but there aren't as many variations when it comes to biological needs as there are with individual needs that are largely coming from, I would say, the spiritual side. You can also argue the cultural side as well. But me being an astrologer, I would say it comes from the spiritual side and how the spiritual side interacts with society and the world. So what I was going to say is that I think the biggest problem is that people nowadays do not see the difference between biological gender and what is a person's individual spiritual needs and energy. And because most people in the scientific community, I mean all people, right? If you're not someone who has a spiritual practice like yours truly over here, basically, if you don't study astrology or something like that, you take that, gender is all nature versus nurture, right? And so you don't take into account the fact that there are parts of a person spiritually that are just not debatable. They are not changeable. And that is the big problem. And this is also why you have people basically questioning homosexuality, right? They're like, oh, well, maybe it's only because the person, I don't know, was exposed to, the little boy was raised among women and he learned to love pink and that made him gay, or something like that, which I would say that's not the case. I would say, unfortunately, some people are confused about their sexuality. That's a different topic. But I don't think that it's possible for someone to become gay by virtue of their culture. Like, literally. I mean, the true gayness comes from a spiritual perspective. It comes from that person's energy. Again, if you believe in reincarnation, I would say it also comes from the person's subconscious desire before they incarnated to experience life as a gay person, which comes with certain challenges that not everyone has to go through. But aside from that, right, I'm not an expert because I'm not gay, so I can't, I'm speaking as an outsider, but this is how I see it, by and large. However, when it comes to this issue of confusion, I think this is where all the confusion comes from. Like, you see all these people like, do I identify as a feminine or a female or a male or whatever? And I'm like, and I'm watching this stuff like, I don't know about this. Like, to be honest, I think these people are largely confused. Like, when I hear this, like, look, there is a biological gender, okay? There is a biological component to gender that I really think is not really changeable. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can change your mechanical body. You can dress up in a different way. But at your core, your DNA will not change. And if you are doing these things to your body, the animal side of you is not going to be happy, because you're pushing it to act against its nature. And again, as far as I've seen, this is really the case. Like, I've actually, just out of curiosity, watched a lot of these like gender transitioning videos and all this stuff. And I used to joke around. Actually, I joked around with a friend that I'm not excluding the possibility of having a sex change, but I have changed my mind really because, the reason I would joke around about this is because I am a person that I feel really does not conform to gender expectations, like social gender expectations. And here's the problem. This is what I was getting at, is that a lot of people sadly feel like they cannot be themselves in this world. So they're considering like, oh, maybe if I change gender, maybe if I don't know, identify as a unicorn, maybe if I don't know, get tattoos and extract one of my, I don't know, organs or whatever, like maybe then I'm going to be left alone to be myself, which is so effing sad. It's the whole problem comes from the fact that society is disgustingly ignorant about, the spiritual component of life. That's what I see. It's like, no, there are parts of you that you cannot change. And I'm sorry to tell you this, that, children are not blank slates. Like, they're just not, okay? You can't just be like, if a girl is born with a strong personality, that's her nature. And for her, it would be, let me put it to you like this. The same thing that you see as horrifying and mutilating when it comes to a person changing genders physically is the same thing that happens to a person spiritually if they are forced to behave in a way that is completely unnatural to them. I'm sorry, there, I said it. It had to be said. Someone has to say it. Now, all of this being said, how exactly, now, obviously, like I said, this is a topic that I could talk about for ages. How exactly do you determine how much masculine or feminine energy a person has? That's the twist of it, because I don't really see it as masculine and feminine, but I have heard other astrologers refer to it as masculine, feminine, right? And to be fair, nakshatras, for instance, also have a gender, or they have the animal that is associated with them has a gender. Every sign in astrology, every planet also has a gender assigned to it, but that's because when these energies, are brought down to the physical plane, they're being viewed through the eyes of bullshit society, which determines what looks masculine and what looks feminine, right? And here's the thing. Some people can have masculine energy and be women biologically. You see this all the time. To be fair, everyone has feminine and masculine energies. I've never seen a person's horoscope, according to astrology at least, I've never seen someone's horoscope where they only had like masculine energy or only feminine energy. It manifests in different ways. This is also why I'm skeptical about astrologers who are trying to like categorize this in very simplistic terms, like, oh, this person has masculine energy, this person has feminine energy. And like they label the person as if, I would avoid doing these kinds of things because it's way more complicated than that. Like, for instance, every now and then I watch Lada Doncheva's channel, and I used to watch her channel, especially when I was into tropical astrology ages ago. And now I have watched her channel like a few times in the past, and there is this woman who I guess partners with her. I think her name is Natalia something. Natalia Kobilkina, I think. Pretty sure. She is a therapist, and she sells her courses and stuff through Lada Doncheva's channel. And just out of curiosity, I was watching like one or two of her I think she had a podcast or something like that where she was talking about relationship stuff and whatever. And she had this video up where she also kind of touched upon astrology. And she said that when it comes to relationships, there are 4 main categories of people. And it really made me laugh. Like, it was kind of like, she said something like, as a woman, you can be a Bambi or a Godzilla. And as a man, you can be a Bambi or a Godzilla. And the way that she explained it in very simplistic terms was that if basically Bambis are people who are, well, she didn't say it exactly like this, but as far as I could gather, they were not particularly good at making money. Or like they're not particularly maybe career driven, right? They're not focused on the outside world. They're more about what they enjoy. about relaxation, family, basically more introverted, more feminine, quote unquote. Whereas the Godzillas, quote unquote, are more, focused on having a mission in the world and achieving things. And they're much more like action oriented and results oriented. And she was like making different categories of compatibility between whether a man is a Godzilla and a woman is a Bambi, and whether both are Bambis, both are Godzillas. And I mean, watching that, I thought it was just so overly simplified. I don't think it is possible to oversimplify people like that, because let me put it to you like this. A person could be very masculine, let's say, quote unquote, in approach with respect to career, and still be very feminine when it comes to romance and relationships. It's very simple, right? If you look at a person's chart and they have Mars and the Sun in the 10th house, irrespective of gender, this is a person who is very rational when it comes to their career area and the social duties area. Especially as a woman, if you also have a feminine planet involved there. And also if you have Venus and Moon, right? Venus and Moon in the 5th house or the 7th house. It shows that you can be like a very romantic little a princess, right? When it comes to romance and relationships and dating, but you can be like a Godzilla, quote unquote, when it comes to pursuing your career goals. See what I'm talking about? So this whole issue of like what's masculine and feminine is really very relative, and it's entirely dependent on the individual situation. I don't think you can just generalize and be like, oh, this person is predominantly male, predominantly female. But that being said though, and I have mentioned this in many videos because this is the general classification of these energies, even according to the sages of Vedic astrology. Planets that are traditionally masculine are the Sun, Mars, Jupiter. To some extent, Rahu as well. Rahu is actually seen as purely rational and materialistic, so it's also seen as more masculine. When it comes to feminine energies, basically Moon, Venus, and also Ketu, because Ketu is more introverted. And again, all of the nakshatras that are ruled by these planets are seen as respectively masculine or feminine. So when you look at a person's chart, when it comes to nakshatras, for instance, and you see that predominantly the nakshatras that they have are ruled by Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Rahu, right? Then you can kind of say this person has predominantly masculine energy. However, even in this situation, it's still relative, because if they have, let's say, Moon in the 1st house or Venus in the 1st house or Moon conjunct Venus in the 1st house, they're also going to have a strong feminine side. See, it's all like very relative. And of course, you also have to look at the Navamsha, because I would say the Navamsha is actually an even stronger indicator of what a person's spiritual energy is, like deep down. I would say the Navamsha is kind of like a distilled version of the person's spiritual inheritance. But yeah, so if you look at a person's horoscope, here's the thing. I want to talk mainly about what happens, let's say, when you have a predominantly masculine energy and you're a woman, is people will tend to think, well, these women are going to be lesbians. Not exactly. I would say, again, going back to the idea that some people are just confused about their gender, the problem is, I would say, especially in today's world, is that these women sometimes consider becoming lesbians, not because they are lesbians, sometimes, okay? I'm talking especially about women who are kind of like in between, like bisexual or like on the fence. Like maybe they could make it work with a woman. I think the reason why these women are kind of bisexual or they consider being lesbian is because society just makes it so unacceptable for them to be themselves in a relationship and also get their needs met, right? Because the more quote unquote traditionalist society is, the more it's going to be focused on stupid gender roles, right? Where the woman stays at home and cleans the toilet, cooks dinner, whatever, does all the menial tasks by herself. And the man goes outside and makes a living. So if you're talking to a woman who has masculine energy, this sounds like a death sentence, right? So a lot of these women will be like, F that, I'd rather either be alone or maybe I should consider dating a woman, someone who can balance my energy. The problem is though, so I'm not saying that this is always the case, that all women who are lesbians or something or bisexual are like this. I would say the ones that are purely lesbian or bisexual have a natural inclination for this, and it doesn't have much to do with how masculine or feminine they are. But yeah, I think gender roles are creating confusion. That's what I'm trying to say. By the same token, if you're a man and you have more feminine energy, sadly, what I have seen happen with, and I'm pretty sure that you can relate to this, I have seen documentaries where I've seen patterns actually of in society where unfortunately men who are sensitive and emotional oftentimes are targets of abuse. So what happens is either they become, again, I think, and I've actually seen, I can think of a documentary that I saw about people who regretted having a sex change operation. And I think three of them actually were men who thought that they were gay and they went through a sex change operation. And in reality, after they had the operation, they kind of came to terms with the fact that they were sexually abused as children. And unfortunately, I think, again, not necessarily saying that this is only happening to men who have feminine energy, but unfortunately, what I think it is more likely that these men are targets because they are more sensitive. They are usually the ones who are more introverted, more understanding. So they kind of give off that energy, that they're not particularly aggressive or something. And unfortunately, especially when early on, in life, and because of their nature, they might even attract men who are actually homosexual and unfortunately maybe predatory. Especially early on in lives when they cannot defend themselves as much. That's what I was trying to say. So it's really sad, but I have seen this, I don't think it's a pattern, and it's definitely don't panic about it if you're a man and you have this energy. But I have seen it kind of like a thing, where they could attract abuse. But irrespective, a man having feminine energy, it's the same problem from a social point of view. Because I was actually thinking about this with respect to Shakira and her boyfriend. I checked her chart, and I'm pretty sure she has, I do remember 100% that she has moon in a Jupiter nakshatra. I think Punarvasu, pretty sure. And her partner has Jupiter in a Saturn nakshatra. I don't remember which one exactly, but it was definitely Saturn. And unfortunately, these cases, I watched some interview with them before the breakup, just out of curiosity for research purposes. I'm not some kind of super fan, but I watched it for research purposes, and I was not surprised because I kind of expected to hear the things and see the things that I saw in the comment section. People basically calling him a simp, calling him like a kind of a, he's under the control of his girlfriend, and the girlfriend is wearing the pants. And you see this kind of situation all the time, where society sticks its ugly head in between two people and says even though this combination can work great for the two people, because when you see a woman who has masculine energy and a man who has feminine energy, I'm talking astrologically here, that's actually a very good match, right? That is a balance of energies. But according to society, especially, in bullshit gender roles dominated societies, society's gonna be like, hey, what kind of a man is this that takes orders from his girlfriend or seems to take orders? That's another thing, because usually when you see this reversal, quote unquote, between energies in the partners, as in, opposite from their biological gender, meaning women who have masculine energy with men who have feminine energy. Usually it's like the same combination as and the same stereotypes that you see when when you analyze relationships between traditional quote men and traditional quote women, meaning that the man who has more feminine energy might come across on the surface as being submissive, quote unquote, but if you actually pay attention to the dynamics in these relationships, the men oftentimes are actually kind of leading from the shadows. They're the ones who are like, they know when to shut up and when to talk and basically kind of manipulate the woman who has the masculine energy. I've seen this happen a lot of the times, trust me. And, it works for them. If it works for them, what's the problem? I can think of couples that I used to know like this. And with these couples, similarly to the Shakira and her boyfriend, I forgot what his name is. Because he's into football. I don't know. I don't understand football. I don't care about that universe. So in any case, like similarly to this couple, I have seen couples where the same thing, the roles seem to be reversed on the surface, where the man was the one who was like quiet and introverted, and the woman was like loud and all over the place. And people, similarly to what you would hear on YouTube about Shakira and her ex, you would hear these comments, like, oh, the guy is being controlled by his wife. He's not a real man. Or like, what kind of a man is this? And unfortunately, what happens is that these couples have to deal with this outside pressure from society, which can actually get to the point of eroding the relationship in time. So this is just to illustrate how people's ignorance really is counterproductive when it comes to relationships between people, like romantic, intimate relationships between two individual people. And again, here's the thing, because I see some of these like, every now and then I watch Joe Rogan or some of these like more macho, I guess, type of men, I guess. And the reason I say this, I find it really funny because usually these guys are the ones who are the most defensive. They're the most anti-feminist, and they start saying, cracking jokes about how feminists are manly and that, they like real women, quote unquote. And the reason I find it funny is because, first of all, these kinds of men are not going to attract women who have masculine energy, right? Because they're going to repel each other. So, in other words, they're just basically wasting their time and energy criticizing something that doesn't even really concern them. But here's the thing, it all boils down to the erroneous assumption that, gender can be influenced, especially early on in life, and that it doesn't have to do with some kind of a inborn quality of the person, but it's all about nature versus nurture. So, this is again one of the gigantic gaslights against modern women, is that women today are, quote, more masculine or becoming more masculine. And again, just to explain this sentence, I would probably have to spend half an hour to show you all the nuances in which people are confused about this, how they're mixing genders and what they are associating with different genders. For instance, the fact that logical thinking, by and large, is still being associated with masculinity, even though logical thinking has nothing to do with masculinity if you break it down. The reason we traditionally associated with masculinity is because for most of human history, men were the ones who were delegated with actually getting results, right? They were out there, they were the ones doing most of the work and the challenges and coming up with solutions to real problems. Meanwhile, women were kept as house pets, right? So that's why we traditionally think logical thinking is a masculine trait. But it's not a masculine trait, it's a human trait, okay? Logic is something necessary in order to get things done. So, of course, women are more logical nowadays because women now actually have the opportunity to get things done, to go out there in the world and deal with real problems. this is not women becoming more masculine, quote unquote. You see what I'm saying? But this is just one of the million ways in which gender, I think, is being misused. And it's really not leading to any kind of progress in the long term. Whatever. Again, I feel like I'm digressing. But basically, yes. Where was I before this? This topic of, yes, masculine women and masculine men. So what am I trying to say is that if you look at two people's charts, let's say one of them is a biological male and the other person is a biological female, and both of them, let's say, have predominantly Mars energy in their horoscopes, they're not going to be attracted to each other. The women who have strong Mars energy will look for men who match, who can complement their energy, right? Just as two magnets of the same polarity will repel, these people will repel. They will repel each other's energy. And I have seen this so often where I look at compatibility analysis, and, you know, you see this. Sometimes I will see that women who have a very strong masculine energy actually have feminine planets and feminine energies surrounding the partner archetype, which does not surprise me, because if your dominant energy is Mars, you're not going to be, your ideal partner is also not going to be Mars, right? Like, you need someone to tone down that energy. You need someone who is more understanding and better at things that you're not good at, right? A Mars dominant person is combative and logical, quote unquote. So they're going to look for someone who's diplomatic and soft and can deal with people, for instance, right? More like a Venus type. That's why the sign that is ruled by Mars, the signs that are ruled by Mars are opposite the signs that are ruled by Venus, right? So, but it gets a bit more complicated, and this is another part that I wanted to say, is that it does get a little bit complicated because from a biological perspective, by and large, there are no differences. That's where I'm going to get. And again, by and large, and I stress this, sometimes there are cases where the person is so, let's say, so much in their spiritual energy, they're so, let's say, authentic and true to their energy that they're going to override their biological imprints. But even in those cases, I would say it's not healthy for the biological side of a person to be ignored, basically. What am I trying to ramble about here? Like, let me give you a very concrete example. If a woman, let's say a woman can have very strong masculine energy, but that doesn't change the fact that she still needs security in relationships. You see what I'm talking about? Because these two things don't really have anything to do with one another. Why? Now, because one of them is spiritual, the other one is biological. The biological comes from the animal instinct. And again, I go back to this issue of what women need in relationships, because this is a topic that is always being talked about, and I've come across it myself in my life up until this point. And every time the few times where I've had guys actually ask me, like, what is an ideal relationship, I would actually blurt out, like, well, I would need a guy to give me security. And they would immediately reply something with something along the lines of, like, wait, you call yourself a feminist, but you want security in a relationship? And I'm like, yes, I don't see where the contradiction is there. You see, the thing is, and again, I'm going back to this topic, the thing is that society for most of human history has been built around men's needs, because they were the ones who made the rules, so they made rules that were according to their needs, while completely ignoring the fact that women are also full human beings who also have a spiritual side and a physical side. I mean, what better example do you need for this, to support this, than the fact that in many countries, including, as far as I heard, the US, you don't even get a minimum of like 3 months of paid maternity leave, right? So women are supposed to like drag their asses off the off the birthing bed and, you know, bleeding all the way to work. And you don't have any allowances for this. And when you start to say anything about it as a woman, you get hit with, it's too much of an expense for the company. And, but it's basically you're being hit with all kinds of BS because they cannot actually back up the things that they're saying. They're not even trying to, offer women opportunities and solutions. I can think of many ways to, give women some basic paid maternity leave, and also maybe give her access to weekly office meetings so that she can, stay up to date with changes in the company or courses or whatever. I think there are methods. There's just no incentive because it's much easier to just, basically think that, it's too much inconvenience, and it's much more convenient for women to, stay at home and basically cook dinner for the rest of their lives for a living. So yeah, again, I feel like I'm digressing. But where was I before this? Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah. The animal side is the animal side, right? So it's like this issue of security for me, it's like non-negotiable. And one of the biggest bullshits is the biggest gaslight that women are being fed is that they shouldn't focus on security, or that, again, they have to choose between security in relationships and their basic human rights. It's like, oh, you can get security, but, you have to basically give up your right to have an education, to own property, to rent a place, to basically everything, every kind of freedom and perk that you have now because of feminism. You have to give it up just so you can get your basic needs met in a relationship, which is bullshit. It is complete and utter bullshit. And whenever I would come across this question, I would tell these guys, I said, yeah, women have different needs in a relationship. The key phrase being in a relationship. Okay, like what does a woman's needs in a relationship have to do with her ability to learn a wide variety of skills, to hold down a job, to support herself, to learn to drive a car, to own property, to sell property, to invest in the stock market, to invest in crypto, to basically do just about everything that a man can do, except for the fact that she has different needs in a relationship. And the problem is what is happening in the world today, and this is just one example of how we are basically abusing the animal side of us. I think collectively. I'm not talking about me because I respect my needs. To a large extent. I mean, aside from the fact that, I'm like, hold on, technical problems. Aside from the fact that, I don't really respect my sleep schedule that much, aside from that, I pretty much do honor the fact that, I have very much specific needs from a biological point of view. And that's the thing, like the animal side and the spiritual side don't have anything to do with one another. That's what I'm trying to say. But this is why it is so difficult for people who do not have like a personality or a general energy that falls into the social definitions of gender to be fulfilled in life, right? Because if you're a woman who has masculine energy, have fun trying to explain yourself to a guy. Like, it's like, well, yeah, I do need security, but then I also want to have the freedom to, travel for work or like pursue my interests. I'm not even talking about having a career here. I'm just talking about doing you, like they say nowadays. So basically, pursuing the parts of life that make you fulfilled as an individual before, getting into things about reproduction and everything like that. Because the purpose of life is not reproduction. And I'm going to, again, quote religious people even that I've heard on this topic, that, if God would have wanted you to be on this planet just to reproduce, he would have made you an amoeba. Basically, because if you say the purpose of life is reproduction, then what's the difference between a human and literally every other animal or organism on this planet? They all live to reproduce because that's the only thing they can do, right? We have a totally different responsibility in this world towards ourselves. And I know I hate to hit people with Spider-Man quotes, but with great power comes great responsibility, So it's like the purpose of life is not just reproduction. But here's the thing, you might say, and also I have to mention one of my favorite people, I'm being sarcastic, Jordan Peterson, who said that women are fulfilled through motherhood. I was like, oh my God. I mean, look, I respect the guy's opinions on some topics, but when it comes to women, he needs to shut the fuck up. Um, he just he really does. I'm sorry, but there's no other way to put it. He doesn't know anything about women. I think he's like Freud the sequel. But with this issue of again, women maybe to some extent are fulfilled through motherhood. But even this is not general, I would say, because again, with some women, their, let's say, desire to have a mission and a career can be so powerful that it overrides their desire to have a family. Which is also true for men, right? I mean, Nikola Tesla, he never got married or had kids. So I don't think it's a general thing, but let's say for the majority, it is true that women are to some extent fulfilled through motherhood, but the animal side of them mainly is fulfilled through motherhood. And again, in some individual cases, it could be because the woman has a strong karmic contract. Some women have to have children because they have a debt, right, to pay towards certain individuals from past lives. Again, this is from the astrologer's perspective. But it's completely false to say that a woman is completely fulfilled through motherhood. That's like saying there's no difference between a woman and a monkey, or an amoeba, like I said, or an Omicron, a virus, a bacteria, anything that just lives to multiply. I'm sorry, but I don't think that is true. And I can back it up with very simple arguments like I have just done. So, aside from that, where was I? Yeah, but there is a challenge, right? And also for men who have a more feminine energy, it's the same thing. I think to some extent for men who have a feminine energy, it's maybe even in some ways worse, depending on, what kind of energy they have. But it's worse because, these men they need to, their energy spiritually doesn't really match, again, similarly to the women, it doesn't match the social expectation. So these men might have a stronger desire for emotional connection, even to feel sometimes protected by the woman that they're in a relationship with, at least emotionally, if not physically. So it's, it brings all kinds of challenges, really. But it's something to be taken into account. And it's, I think, definitely something that society needs to open up to and understand, open their eyes and realize not everyone is the same. This is it's ridiculous. We are in the 21st century and there are still people thinking humans are cookie cutter molds. People just, or mass produced tools, they are all coming in the same dimensions and they all need the same things because based on gender or race or whatever. The truth is that the Age of Aquarius, one of the best parts about the Age of Aquarius is the end of the one size fits for all. So you're starting to see this in other branches of conventional wisdom, like genetics now. I've also mentioned this in some other video where I talked about the Age of Aquarius, but you start to see this more and more where people are just accepting the fact that, look, there is no one size fits for all. Every person is different. And what works, one person's heaven is another person's hell, that kind of thing. But the way to happiness and productivity in the world in general is to accept the individual differences and work with them instead of against them. In other words, if a person, let me put it to you like this, a woman who has a strong Mars energy is not going to be happy being a housewife, with very few exceptions, okay? Because why? Think about what these archetypes show, right? The Mars is the general warrior archetype. These people who are Mars dominant, they thrive on challenges and challenging situations. That's what they live for. So it's imagine taking a warrior and putting it in a beautiful, luxurious garden. I mean, he might be happy for a while, but what happens is pretty soon is that he'll start to lose interest, he will start to become bored and then depressed and eventually start to lose the will to live. Why? Because the thing that he was designed to do, which is to handle crisis situations, he doesn't get the chance to do in a beautiful garden, in, some kind of a safe, protected environment where nothing happens, right? Like, and again, this depends in astrology, like in anything else, depends from one individual to another. And like I also mentioned in that previous example, a woman, let's say, could have Mars in the 10th house or Mars in the first house and be very tough in many ways, but she can have Venus in the 5th house or Moon in the 5th house, Moon in the 4th house. And so she will also have a very gentle side when it comes to her private life. So you cannot make these assumptions, and this is also leading me to another gigantic gaslight that I hear against women, primarily from men, with respect to women becoming more masculine. I hear this argument of well, men like women who are, gentle and empathetic because we think those women are going to make better mothers, right? First of all, a lot of the gaslights that are happening against feminism center around what makes a woman a better mother. Let me tell you something. My mother has Mars in the 1st house, okay? And she was a self-taught programmer, and she was the first one in her family to graduate from college with a math degree. And she was a self-taught programmer back in the 70s when you had to learn COBOL and Fortran. Okay, and this was before GitHub and tutorials and all this stuff. And let me tell you, if you would have seen her on Saturday cooking dinner with her apron on and whatever, you wouldn't have seen any difference between her and a random housewife. Because what women show in public is different from what they are in private. Women, just like men, will adapt to the circumstances. They will compartmentalize. But of course, if you are deeply rooted in chauvinism, you're not going to accept that. You're not going to accept the fact that women are multidimensional. You don't ever see, society being like, oh, Elon Musk must be a shit husband and a shit father because he's so obsessed with his career. Although, to be fair, he probably is. But you don't see society, being like, oh my God, he's such a horrible partner, right? Or you don't see people being like, he must be such a horrible, unromantic person because he's so passionate about his career. No, because people understand that a man, has one face in public or one face in his professional life and a totally different side that he keeps in private. But somehow when it comes to women, it's like men cannot accept that women have the same thing going on, which they do, especially if they are educated and especially if it's also reinforced by their astrological chart, like I mentioned with the examples I talked about. Yes, another example of how, gender classification is going wrong in society, and creating problems for everyone, I would say. And another thing that I wanted to say with respect to this gender issue, right? Let me think. What did I actually want to say? Yeah, but with respect to this, more masculine, more feminine, okay? This is the main thing that I wanted to say, is that, yes, there is a biological gender, and the biological gender is basically, it needs what it needs. I think that's my view, at least. And this issue, again, going back to the issue, I have to go back to this issue again because it is so talked about and there's so much BS and confusion about it. This whole issue of what women need in relationships. So to me, there's no effing mystery, okay? What I see happening in society is more like men know what women need, but they're not willing to comply. It's what I see happening in society right now in the post-feminist era is that basically men are holding women's needs in a relationship above their heads and being like, hey, if you want this, you're gonna sign off your basic human rights and become my personal slave so that I can feel like a man in your presence, because otherwise I'm not gonna give you the security that you need in relationships. Which this is a huge part of why natality is going down and why relationships are the way that they are. And let me tell you something, the men who do understand these very simple facts are usually married by the time they're 30 or 40 at most. The ones that I know who basically seem to get it right, and again, I don't want to convert anyone and use religion as an example. I'm not particularly religious myself, but I have to admit, I actually was thinking about this relatively recently. The people that I know who are Baptist, who are going to church regularly and all this stuff, they really seem to be getting something right. Even the ones in our generations, millennials, most of them, they were married with kids by the time they were 30. And both the mother and the father, the ones that I know at least, are full-time employed and well-educated. They make good money and they have like 2-3 kids by the time they're 30. And this is because in the Christian communities, despite all of the protestations that you might have against them, because definitely I'm not saying that they're perfect, but at least they get this thing very right, which is that men are educated to understand that, hey, women have different needs in relationships. Women need security in relationships. And to a large extent, this was what all men were taught before feminism. I would say even early on in the feminist days, men understood this collectively, that you had to respect the fact that women have different needs in relationships. And at the same time, as part of the Christian faith, they're also taught that women have a spiritual side that also has to be nurtured and respected, right? That women should have the right to pursue their interests and their education and all that, provided that they do not neglect their what do you call them? Wifely duties and motherly duties and all that. And there is all this theory, of course, in Christianity that comes with it. But the main idea is there, right? They respect the fact, at least, that women have both a spiritual and a biological side. And that's why they make it work. Yeah. This is something that I wanted to say. And also, one final thought about this issue of gender is that there are variations, because I was starting to say something about this, but I digressed. There are variations even among the so-called masculine energies in astrology and the feminine energies, right? There's a difference between being a Venus archetype or a moon archetype. There's a difference between being a Mars archetype and being a Jupiter archetype. Sometimes, and of course, different people can be different combinations. You could have a person who is like predominantly Jupiter and Venus, a person who is predominantly Mars and Saturn, etc., right? Or different combinations of planets. So this is why it's really difficult to generalize on the one hand. But I really wanted to say this, that there are differences between archetypes, because I see these gross generalizations made by other astrologers where they're labeling people like, oh, like this woman has masculine energy, this man has feminine energy. But there are considerable differences between the different archetypes, right? There's a huge difference between, let's say, a person who has planets in Bharani, which is a feminine nakshatra, and a person who has planets in Rohini, which is another feminine nakshatra, right? There are significant differences between these archetypes. So, again, I am against basically this is the general idea that I'm against any kind of generalization. So to say these things, like, also another thing that really cracked me up, I came across this astrologer who said something along the lines of like, the women who are masculine, something about women who are masculine. She kept saying stuff like women who are masculine, this, masculine, that. And I remember listening to that and I was like, again, I find this really offensive because, and again, right, that I was listening to the fact that she said, oh, women who are masculine are, I think she put it along the lines of like, they are externally aggressive, but internally submissive. And that women who are feminine are externally submissive and internally aggressive. Which to me sounded like mumbo jumbo, but I think what she was trying to say was basically that women who have predominantly, and not just women, men as well. That's the twist that nobody tells you, unless you are an astrologer, you don't know about it. But men who have predominantly feminine energy, they're just as manipulative as the women. The only difference is that society turns a blind eye to men being manipulative, but women are immediately called out for it, right? If you're a man, it's like, oh, if you're good at manipulation, you have a great career in politics waiting for you. But if you're a woman and you manipulate, I was like, oh my God, you're a harpy, right? You are a cold-blooded, evil harpy, just looking to hunt men and steal their hard-earned money. And all this stuff. But aside from that, going back to this idea of externally submissive, I think what she was, and she was actually, if I remember correctly, she used the example of Mars dominant women. Well, let me tell you, there's a huge difference between Mars dominant women and Jupiter dominant women, for instance. And actually, I would say that I have pretty strong energies of both. And let me tell you how the Mars archetype works. And I've seen this with plenty of women in my time. I have women in my own family who are Mars dominant. And the Mars archetype is the warrior/general. So they, first of all, respect logic, competence, right? Mars is the most strategic, aggressive, masculine sort of energy. It's all about competition, being first, getting things done, right? So women who have a strong Mars energy, they embody this archetype of being a warrior. And they look for a person. Basically, what do warriors look for, right? They want a worthy leader. They want a king that they can follow and respect. And this is why these women usually, they go for men who are powerful and tough and, the Joe Rogans of the world. Or those kinds of like macho types of men, because they want men that they can respect, that they can admire. But this so-called submission, it's not like some kind of blind submission, because let's not forget that the Mars dominant women are also the ones who are the best at taking care of themselves. So they will respect and they will follow their partners as long as the partners are up to the standards, right? As long as the partners do not disappoint, they are worthy leaders, quote unquote, to follow, then the woman will be, let's say, submissive, willing to back down and play the second fiddle, at least to some extent. But if the guy doesn't, is not up to par, forget about it. These women are not naturally submissive, okay? And by the same token, what I understand by women who are, quote, how she put it, externally submissive is basically women who are manipulative. It's like, and usually this is the case when you see women who have predominantly, especially as far as I've seen Saturn and Venus, but also Moon to some extent, energies. These are women who play along with the common delusions of society, right? They don't try to correct men. That's the difference. And that's another thing that I have said to people throughout my life, and I continue to say to anyone who is willing to listen, that basically there are two main categories of women. There are feminists and war profiteers. And the war profiteers, well, to be fair, there's also the, LGBTQ women who are kind of like Switzerland in World War II, right? They're like neutral territory. They don't care. But mainly the women who are straight, let's say, are two categories, right? There are women who are, like I said, feminists who are basically the ones who are willing to tell it like it is, right? They are just upfront, blunt. They don't sugarcoat things. And then there are women who are war profiteers, who basically just feed off of men's delusions and men's delusional perceptions of reality, right? These women will be the ones who are like, why would you bother to, be honest? Why would you create conflict? It's kind of, why would you create conflict when you can just use men? You can just, if they want to see a pretty woman, then, do everything to play along with the fantasy, keep your mouth shut, get the ring on your finger, and then, to get the security that you need. But in the process, they lose themselves, right? They don't have the freedom to express their full selves, their spiritual side. On top of which, I've also talked about this in the manipulation video, these women end up feeling alone in the relationships. Because if you manipulate someone into a relationship, this person doesn't even know who you are, right? They're falling in love with an image. and they're relating to the image of you. They're not relating to you as a person. And I've seen this a lot of the times where these women who are so-called, quote, feminine, like, they end up, you know, feeling alone, feeling depressed in relationships, or they're like, oh yeah, well, this guy only likes me as long as I don't know, act really loud in the bedroom and feed his ego, but he's not willing to actually support me as a person, doesn't actually care about me, my happiness as a person. Yeah. So much for the differences between, you know, externally submissive and internally submissive and all this stuff. Like, to me, it just seems like mumbo jumbo. It's like, at the end of the day, people should have the right to be authentic. That's how I see it. It's like, as long as you are not out there being antisocial and trying to enslave others in order to achieve your dreams, you should have the right to be yourself. I don't think it's like, you know, I as a woman, and I also talked about this in other videos, that I should be walking on eggshells around men because I need to make sure not to disturb their delusions about women. You know, it's kind of like saying, you know, you need to be careful. It's kind of like, it's the same way as being careful around children who believe in Santa Claus. You know, be careful not to burst their bubble like before time, because they're going to be horribly traumatized and disappointed. You know, at too young of an age before they should be disappointed. Anyway, I totally digress. So thus I am concluding this rant, and again, I've been all over the place, but I have considered talking about this in future videos, like, or other related topics about gender and maybe feminism as well. Some general gaslights that I have noticed in society against women and feminists in particular, which I think are ridiculous. Yeah, but again, if you have listened up until the end, thank you very much, and you deserve an award for having listened to my entire rant. And if you have enjoyed the video and you would like to see more content from me, please do not forget to subscribe. And also, if you want to see when I'm going to post a new video, please click the notifications bell. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics with respect to natal or relationship astrology. And also, I do tarot readings. You can email me at the email in the video description. Thank you.